bit about Jim Pugh. He's a trombonist, composer, and educator. He was born in Camden, New Jersey, but was raised in Butler, Pennsylvania. He studied with Emery Remington at the Eastman School of Music. Upon graduating, he went on to perform, tour, and record lead trombone and solo trombone with Woody Herman's Thundering Herd in the 70s. Also in the 70s, he was a trombonist with Chick Corea's Return to Forever band. Later on, he went on to be a trombonist with Steely Dan. He still is. In around 1980, he ended up going to New York to start his career as a freelance trombonist, playing on things like film scores, records, music for television, radio advertising, etc. So Jim's the kind of trombone player that can do it all, whether it's a trombone concerto, whether he's playing lead in a big band, whether he's recording a solo for a small group jazz setting. Jim's versatility allows him to be comfortable in a number of settings. As it turns out, this interview was quite extensive, so I'm going to go ahead and break it up into two parts. Here's part two. Question number 6. What's the biggest obstacle you've had to overcome so far?
True confessions time. About maybe 8, 10 years ago is when I started actively like fixing this.
Mhm.
I was noticing my playing was getting progressively worse,
Huh.
and every trick I knew, every thing out of the Remington playbook, anything out of the Matty Scheider playbook that I sort of knew about how to put stuff here back together, wasn't working, and it was sliding down. And I was still doing the Steely dance. I was like, because I guess as you get older, you learn tricks of how to get around things when stuff's not working 100% perfectly. You know, um, so that part was still cool. But when you're sitting down, when you're practicing, you're flexible. All this stuff is like going downhill. And finally, as a last ditch, well, no, it wasn't really the last ditch effort. I went to the dentist and was getting a night guard because I have a tendency to grind my teeth. And just over the years, for whatever reason, I don't know why, but I'd gotten at various stages had gotten molds of my teeth made. And when they were doing the mold for this night guard, I had them do like an extra set of plaster molds for me. So I brought them home and pulled out like molds from like 10 or 20 years before. I looked at them, and the teeth had shifted to where you could look at the two of them and see how much the teeth had moved. And so as part of the last ditch effort on this, I was like thinking, well, it's this whole thing that like the teeth are sort of what define the shape of the airstream that leaves them. They're the only hard surface the air hits. When it leaves the teeth, it is in some shape, right? So anyway, my shape had gotten noticeably different. Um, and I just on a lark, I went into an orthodontist here, and I was already living out here,
Mhm.
and had all these like I had molds from like 10 years before, I had molds from 20 years before, and I asked him, can I try as like a last ditch effort? Can we try and put my teeth back to what they were 20 years ago? And he, I think, as part of the challenge of it, um, bought into it because it's like I don't want my teeth perfect. I want them to be my teeth from, I want to do a time machine thing here. And and little by little he did incrementally with Invisalign, the or type of things that he actually had to make himself because
Wow.
Invisalign wouldn't, if you're going towards making them perfect, they'll buy into that. We weren't making them perfect. We were making my imperfect from years before. So he made these things and took and incrementally we got them back to where, and it basically fixed, because it's like I had learned to play on this set of teeth that stayed relatively stable for a long period of time.
Yep.
There is, I mean, I don't want to get off on another topic here, but there is there is a study of geriatric dentistry. As you get older, your teeth start shifting more.
Got it.
And this is basically what had happened because I did, in orthodontia and stuff from earlier on, and because of mouth crowding, I'd had teeth pulled out, which means all of a sudden there's gaps in there and stuff. So the teeth were moving and sliding around, and as you get older, they start sliding around more. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
so anyway, that was yeah, because it had reached the point that if this hadn't done it, I was basically seriously ready to put the horn in the case.
Wow.
So I would say that was the obstacle because it's very unnerving. Well, and it's a little strange. It's a little weird too when you're professing to be teaching people and you can't fix what you see happening on
Yeah.
yourself. So I was going through a lot of
Yeah.
a lot of psychological
Yeah. I would imagine. Yeah.
because what I'm supposed to do, I can't fix myself. Plus, I'm losing this thing that has been my and we identify as
Yeah.
trombonists,
It's stressful.
so it had been part of my identity, and all of a sudden it's leaving, and basically this was like a last ditch effort, and it ended up sort of being the thing that
Saved.
helped it. So anyway,
That's
that's
great, man.
true confessions.
No, that's yeah, that's not
You're
stuff.
learning more than you ever, you're finding out more than you ever wanted to know.
No, that's great, and it could help a lot of people too who might be going through similar thing. I've heard different stories. It's more evidence that your teeth make a big difference in how you play.
Well, that was
Another great
one of
thing.
my early teachers, Matty Shiner. That was his whole thing. He had and I think his concept about this never really caught on because he never really published it or backed it up like scientifically or whatever. But he had this whole thing about the looking for like there's a high point that the teeth create, which I think the upshot of that is that it shapes the airstream in a certain way
Yeah,
that makes it either efficient or non-efficient when it hits the aperture. So, I mean, this is a, a whole thing. And I know I've had talks with Doug Elliott about this. He's very adamantly against
mm,
this idea, but again, he was coming from having studied with Doc Reinhardt and the whole thing about facial shapes and all that. So he's got his idea, but um, I'm pretty convinced, and there's a whole lot of different versions. If you find people that have like a high point that's over the side, they will tend to play towards that high point. That becomes like again, it's how that defines the shape of the air. Airstream and all that kind of stuff, and the mass in here and the speed of the air and all that kind of stuff is all part of it too. But it also, again, because this is the not only the last, but it's the only hard surface, the only like ungiving. Everything else, like when it hits your lip, yeah, if you have a nice tight embouchure, even if the muscles are very tense, they still have give. So that's a malleable shape. Your
yeah,
teeth are not malleable. When the air leaves, goes past these teeth here, it has a shape to it that's you can't you can't fudge that. It is what
yeah,
it is.
yeah,
And that's why I'm also convinced that everybody, it's like, I guess we as teachers can guide people to things to learn, to work on, all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, because everybody's oral geometry is different, everybody learns to play for themselves. Because you ultimately have to learn to play the airstream shape that your teeth make.
yeah,
And your musculature learns to play that airstream. I learned to play mine. If all of a sudden we could swap teeth, I wouldn't know how to play, and neither would you. You wouldn't know what to do with my airstream,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and I wouldn't know what to do with yours because my embouchure is built to work with mine.
Yeah. It
You
makes a
know.
lot of sense. Yeah, I play off to the side. This tooth sticks out. Not to go off, but yeah, yeah. Wow, Jim, interesting. I never knew that, and I've talked to you about a few things too. So
Well, that's the kind of thing that a lot of times you don't really necessarily get into if there's not a problem. You know, if people are playing fine, well,
Yeah.
then you know what you need to know. But you know my whole thing about having people get molds of their teeth.
Yeah. Yep. One of the first
You
things.
know, that's one of the first things everybody that comes in here, I want you to go get a mold and put it in a drawer. You know, partially for this and partially for the fact as an insurance policy, because if something happens and you bump your, you know, you fall on the ice or somebody slaps you in the back when you're having a drink at a water fountain or something, you chip a tooth.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have a picture of that, a dentist isn't going to know how to rebuild that to be your tooth.
Yeah.
You know, a tooth knocks out. Well, all of a sudden, if you don't have it, they don't know how long a tooth is, the angle it's at,
Mm-hmm.
the shape, the width of the tooth, all that stuff
Mm.
has an effect on the airstream that goes past that tooth. So all of a sudden, it's a little bit longer. Well, that wasn't there before. So you learn to play on this tooth that was shorter. You know, so either if your embouchure is flexible enough, you could relearn to play on that new tooth, or possibly it's so far off there. You know, there's probably a given like area in there that you can make it work, and if it goes past that too much, all of a sudden your embouchure can't make it work anymore. You know, so I don't know, but
Yeah.
so it's like insurance policy. Like every 10 years, get a new set made. Constant, you know, dentists will do it for like $100.
Yeah.
We put them in a drawer and hide them away. You know, pull them out at Halloween to scare kids. You know, it's like. But other than that, it's a very inexpensive insurance policy.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing, Jim. On to the next question. What is one of the best pieces of advice you have received?
I remember one time very early in my career in New York, they people tend to call you for every instrument. So I remember I got called to go play bass trombone, and I owned a bass trombone. I didn't really play bass trombone at this point. I got better at it later, but at this point I didn't. I sort of looked at it as like, well, I mean, uh, I had this, and this is really sort of a jerky way of looking at it. I always had this feeling. It was like, if you don't know better than to call me to play bass trombone, you deserve what you're going to get. That's a bad way of looking at things. I know. So, but anyway, I remember getting called to play bass trombone. I took the call and went and did it, and wasn't it was a little bit of a real bass trombone part, and I wasn't really up to the task. And there was this woodwind player. He had also been a graduate of Eastman by the name of George Marge, who was like he passed away a number of years ago, but he was at that point was like he wasn't really a jazz player, but he was like the quintessential woodwind doubler. He was like the doubling king. I mean,
Yeah.
all the saxophones, all the clarinets, all the flutes, exotic ocarinas, recorders, you know, all this that he was the guy who could play anything that was a woodwindy kind of instrument. Double reeds, you know. All that. I don't think he played bassoon. That's maybe the only instrument he didn't
Hmm.
play. But
Okay.
from being a doubler, and we had been friends. We had the Eastman connection in common and stuff. And I remember, and it was so gracious. He was like a very, very sweet man. And but he sort of took me off in a hallway, a little bit beside it. All he said to me, he said, whenever I'm playing my doubles, it's like I sort of won't play it unless it sounds like it's my primary instrument. And then just sort of walked away. He
Wow.
just offered this up, um, and the ramifications are it's like, well, yeah, you can, you do something like this. I show up on bass trombone and I sound like a beginner. It's like you can do your whole reputation damage. All of a sudden, that fact that you stunk on that day on that instrument ties over into what people start thinking of your tenor trombone. So it's like, and it was a very beautiful. So I again put it away, turned down any calls until I felt I was like okay to go do that. So it's like um it was a very, very the way he did it because he took me off in private. He didn't do this in front of anybody. Just
Yeah.
did it such a very, very gentlemanly, very teacher like, very helpful way and did it, not saying, "Hey man, you really suck on bass trombone." He didn't say that. He referenced it in his view of how he looked at his double, because that's he was a professional doubler, you know, and I thought that was an incredibly wonderful piece of advice.
Yeah, that's powerful.
The other one was when I started doing more teaching, when I started teaching up at Purchase College and everything. I
Yeah.
remember, and I can't remember now who it was that told me this, but it was one of those things that like you think about, and all of a sudden at 3 in the morning you start understanding what they told you, you know. But they said, now you're starting to teach. They said, don't try to teach the way you think you play. My take on that came down to, it's like, we're so far away from, if you've been playing, like I've been playing for, like, I'm closing on like 60 years now. you know I'm so far away from how I was playing, or how I was having to learn to play when I was 10 years old. I don't know what that was anymore. you know it's like, because you pick it up and things are hopefully at this point relatively natural,
Yeah.
and it's like I don't have any connection with that. So you make assumptions about how you're doing things that very possibly are not how you're actually doing things, or not the progression that got you to be able to do those things. So it's like it put me in a situation of going back and
Yeah.
the idea of teaching, to really think about it more than just sort of pop off the top of my head how I think I'm doing this. You
Yeah.
know, oh yeah, if I stick my tongue in you stick your tongue in your ear and then everything works great. It's like, well, no, that's not what you're actually doing. What you're actually doing, is different. And I always thought that was an interesting, because what it's saying underneath the surface of that is that you really need to try to get in touch with that earlier player that you were, when you were trying to put all this stuff together
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you do easily now. There was a point when it wasn't easy, but you sort of forget that, because, well, if I look, even if you talk about that long ago, I've been playing, like, well, if I started in 1960, by 1972 I was on Woody Herman's band. So that's that first 12 years. Well, even that 12 years, that's 50 years since then
Hmm.
that I've been playing professionally, and at hopefully at least a quasi professional level. So my connection with that, what happened in that first 10 years, is very, like, probably inaccurate now,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. No, I think that's powerful, especially for performers who are uh, teaching and are in education. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, that I found out when I started teaching, like sort of real teaching. I found out there's a huge difference between going in and doing a clinic and teaching. Because a clinic, you go in, you spout off what you spout, you do your song and dance, and then you leave. You never see if any of that makes any sense, if any of that, again, what you're walking in, my take on that is walking in and doing those clinics and talking about what I think I'm doing,
Yep.
you know. And then when you actually teach and people come back and you see the same player week after week after week after week, and you find out the things that actually work and the things that actually are just like either don't work or are actually detrimental. So a lot of what I thought, over the course of actually teaching like this, I've changed how I use things,
Hmm.
and how I'll move somebody to a certain exercise or something,
Yeah.
and how to approach it. That's very different from what I would tell people when I was just doing, when my whole teaching thing was popping up and doing a clinic and a concert that
Yeah.
night.
Yeah.
You know, and it's interesting. Not that that's bad either, because that's a nice contact point with professional players and stuff. But it was that was enlightening
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah. That's great, Jim. Thanks. Question number 8. How have you balanced family life and career life?
Earlier on, not so well. That's why I got divorced. Um, part of it. Uh, because actually, at that point, there were my wife was a professional pianist. My first wife was a professional pianist in New York, and we had two careers going that didn't they weren't in opposition, but the fact that we were both individually involved in our own careers
Hmm.
meant that we weren't involved with each other
Yep.
that much, and that just pulled apart. We ended up great friends, and I wouldn't trade in anything. And also, we sort of purposely avoided expanding the family because we were both so career oriented.
Yeah.
Um, the fact, like now, I have a relatively young family, like a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old, and am remarried, and um, I think that came at a point in my life where my emphasis on my playing career was, I was very happy with that being in the back seat. So it's actually
Yeah.
worked out pretty nicely. I will do stuff for my kids, like like before. If I had to, like, nothing can get in the way of my practicing. Nothing can
Mhm.
get in the way of the trombone. Now, if it's a thing where family needs to come first, family comes first,
That's great.
and I'm okay with the other. And part of that too is like I remember how many decades it took for me to be comfortable taking a vacation where I couldn't practice,
Mm.
or I wouldn't take vacations, or if I did, I had to lug my horn along, or at least the mouthpiece and
Yep.
all this kind of stuff. And getting to that, I guess, out of that a little bit OCD thing about practicing, but then also that the thing of realizing, well, say at this point, if you've been playing for 40 years or something, if you don't play for a week, you're not going to forget how to play. Yeah, the muscles may not be the best they've ever been, but you can build that back up. And it's like, not that I'm recommending not playing or going on extended vacations, but a lot of that, this trust of like, well, yeah, if you don't play for a day, you're not going to forget how to play. In normal day-to-day situations, you try not to do that. I try not to do that now. I still, I don't really have any gigs coming up. I think none of us do right now, but keep practicing anyway, at least so it doesn't hurt to practice tomorrow, you know. But but the just that idea of being able to have part of your personal life take precedence maybe over the instrument for a little bit,
Yeah.
which is maybe that's a function of being older too. When you're young, you're very anxious for things to get going,
Mhm.
and rightfully so. That's the time you need to be doing that. That's the time you need to be obsessive about practicing
Yeah.
and obsessive about, well, yeah, this gig that seems like it's important but only pays $50 means that I'm not going to take my vacation. Well, there's a time when it's appropriate to do that.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
it's tricky.
Yeah.
It's tricky. There was this guy named Michael Light who wrote a play that was on Broadway called Sideman. That was basically about his growing up. His father had been like a club date or like wedding bands and that kind of stuff. That's what they call them in New York. Sometimes they call them general business gigs, but
Hmm.
a club day trumpet player. And he wrote this play actually about the ramifications of growing up in a family with his father who was a club day trumpet player and was gone nights and out and all this kind of stuff. And the whole thing, like there was this whole thing in the play when the dad went out and he was wearing this blue tuxedo jacket, which was a horrible gig that the dad hated playing. He knew when the dad came home from that gig, he was going to be in a rotten, foul, abusive mood because of this gig. It was this whole thing based on that. So it's actually, I mean, we're looking at this from the kid's viewpoint of
Interesting. Yeah.
of a father who was an obsessed musician,
Mm-hmm.
There was it was really pretty interesting. And his dad was still alive at that point. He'd been like the trumpet player on the original run of Hair when that was Don Light was his name. But it was very interesting. It was great. I went and saw the play, and it was spoke to what it is sometimes in household musical households, and how
Yeah.
it again, he was writing it from the viewpoint of the child having to deal with this.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like everybody has a different experience, and you try your best to make it work, Jim. Yeah, I think this will speak to a lot of people out there. So whether they have kids or other family relationships, just a couple, whatever it is. So
It's hard.
yeah.
It's um, the arts are not easy. I mean, there
Yeah.
was that whole Betty Davis line about growing old ain't for sissies. Well, also being good and successful or competent in an art is not for sissies.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why high school guidance counselors the world over will try to talk students they're guiding out of going into music, out of going into graphic arts, out of going into dance, out of going into sculpture, um, because it's tricky. It's like I remember there was I saw this one master class with Phil Woods.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Incredible, like he was like the king of the studios, alto saxophonist in New York for forever and ever and ever. But and he was talking about it's like I remember him saying if because he was talking to a bunch of high school kids. It's like if you're coming down to where you're going to trying to choose your career, and if it's between music and something else, he says pick the something else. So if it's like because music is not an easy thing to do, it has to be the thing you have to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's like um, you say if it is like an either or, well then you're possibly not committed enough to be able to hang in
Mm.
when things don't work out as well as they should. So it's like go ahead and pick the other one and keep music or art or whatever as your avocation, as your hobby, and love it. I mean, many people have done that and still been great,
Yeah.
incredible players. There was a guy in New York by the name of Ron Odrich who he was like the one of the most respected periodontists in New York, and also an insanely great clarinet player.
Hmm.
He ended up recording albums and doing. He was like he was up there with like Eddie Daniels level kind
Mm.
of clarinet playing,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, and he basically did oral surgery to pay for his jazz habit, you know. But he was also, like I said, also like one of the most respected periodontists in New York.
Yeah. Wow.
That's no mean feat, and also happened to be one of the best clarinet players in New York.
Mm.
Like trad and like jazz clarinet. So doing doing another career doesn't mean that you have to like the music has to take a back seat
Yeah.
necessarily. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Jim. Okay, we're almost there. Number 9. What projects are you currently working on?
nothing. I'm trying to tidy up a bunch of stuff that I've sort of backburnered while the school year is going on and stuff. Since we're not in normal school years,
Yeah.
I'm trying to complete a couple books that I've like sort of method but specific directions in trombone pedagogical method book stuff. I'm trying to get those completed. I'm trying to finish up tidying up um, because I have some special books like Vern Reynolds stuff and Guy Lacour and stuff that I have students play. And I'm trying to go back and re-edit and make those a little bit more readable.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
are get rid of some of the E and B sharps and those kind of things. Trying to make things a little bit just things that just because there's always so much in the summers I'm out doing Steely Dan, so it's like I don't necessarily get around to doing it. So I'm trying to take advantage of this time just to check off the list a bunch of stuff that's been
Yeah. Yeah.
building up over time. So I don't have a specific project I'm
Okay.
involved in right now.
Several smaller projects. Yeah. No, it sounds like yeah, it's a lot to do. So
Getting all these projects I've been ignoring.
yeah, no, it'll be good to see some of that stuff soon. So yeah, I'm sure a lot of viewers will be excited about that. Okay, final question. If you had to leave trombonists and musicians with one piece of advice, what would it be?
If you don't already, try and figure out how to shape your thinking to where you love practicing. I think that's something that sometimes if practicing, if that solitary event of having to deal with just you and the instrument, if
Mhm.
that's a drudgery or something that has to be done, and it's not perfect. Even if you love practicing, there's some days where it's
Yeah.
hard to
Oh
squeeze
yeah.
it. And if you do it, you have to do it out of some duty,
Yep.
So that's one thing. That's a discipline. But this idea of like doing whatever it takes that you get yourself to where you love to practice, where you love playing the instrument, because that ultimately is what makes it easier to progress.
Yeah.
It's like you talk about, yeah, you should play this book and you should do this, and you should, all that stuff is like that's sort of the peripheral thing. But whatever it is you can find in it that makes you love or want to go practice, whether it's that you're going to take 15 minutes and just noodle and improvise, whether it's you're going to find some Bach flute piece or something that you're going to play, whether it's, whatever it is about it, whether you're going to get some pattern, learn all, whatever it is that sort of like floats your boat or get you excited,
Hmm.
making sure that is a big part of what you're doing. Yeah, it's like nobody likes warming up. Other than saying like 60 years later, I thought I'd be warmed up by now. It's like it's like every day I still got to warm up.
Yeah.
So you go through that, but it's like this whole thing because if you love it, then it's easy.
Yeah.
And if you don't, then I'm not sure how. Well, you're not going to continually grow either. You may reach a point you get really, really good, and you'll stay at that good, which may be good enough, may be fine for some people. But if you love practicing, I mean, I think those are the people. I mean, one of my inspirations in that again is Dave Taylor. I always bring him up because there was a period we lived a couple miles from each other in New Jersey, and we were working together when there was a very fertile recording scene. We
Yeah.
were both really busy and both getting called a lot. We worked together a lot, so we would, you get called like the night before for a jingle the next morning or whatever, and we'd ride in and out of the city. So whenever I get called for something, I would usually assume Dave was on it, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And so I'd call him up, like whenever the call came in, and just see, do I ride in together, blah blah blah, you know. And so my calls to his house are always very random times of the day. Sometimes 2 in the afternoon, sometimes 11 in the morning, sometimes 6 o'clock, sometimes 10 o'clock at night. All different times of the day. Um, if he answered the phone, I was always just interrupting his practicing. Or if his wife answered the phone, I was always hearing him practicing in the background without fail. I mean, I'm sure it was
Wow.
totally 100%.
That says a lot. Yeah.
But yeah, it was. And you don't, that's the reason why he sounds like he sounds.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't reach that level without that kind of dedication. And his goal, I don't think his goal was just to play. He just loves to play. And if you can reach that kind of relationship with your instrument,
Mm.
the rest of it, a lot of it'll take care of itself.
Yeah.
It's like I mean, it's that old line about if you watch your pennies, the dollars will take care of themselves. It's sort of a little bit of a paraphrase of that. It's like if you love practicing, the whole thing about are you good enough and
Hmm.
all that other stuff sort of takes care of itself.
Yeah.
I mean, there's another line too. It's like the more I practice, the luckier I get. You know, yeah. Funny thing about that. You know, but the bottom line of it, I think, is like whatever you can do to put yourself in that space where you love to practice.
Yeah.
Like the biggest, as far as like developing your music, is like the
Yeah.
biggest thing I can throw out there. But
Yeah. Thanks, Jim.
1 through 10.
Much. I think a lot of people can, just from this question alone, can benefit. It says a lot. Thanks for taking time out of your day. I think a lot of musicians, not only trombonists, um, are going to really enjoy what we talked about today and some of the questions that you answered, some of the anecdotes that you had. So I really appreciate it.
Hope so. Well, thanks for having me in this this maiden voyage of the.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, yeah. All right. So that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed the interview with Jim Pugh. There's a lot of gems in there. If you found this video useful or interesting, please like it and share it, and consider subscribing to my channel. If you have any questions or thoughts, please leave them down below in the comments section. And until then, we'll see you all next time. Bye.